suis François Richard, je suis directeur académique du centre de l'Université de Chicago et c'est notre grand plaisir aujourd'hui d'accueillir un séminaire très intéressant, très innovateur, assez inédit d'ailleurs je crois dans l'histoire du centre. Je crois qu'on n'a jamais eu un sujet, une conférence ou un colloque sur ce sujet. Donc le colloque s'intitule « Les terrains d'aventure, l'Europe et les États-Unis en dialogue, Adventure Playgrounds, a Dialogue between the US and Europe ». Et donc, il va se conduire sous forme de webinaire. Alors, je vais laisser aux organisateurs le soin de, bien sûr, comme il se doit, d'introduire et de présenter le séminaire. Moi, je vais juste me cantonner à quelques remarques très préliminaires sur le centre de l'Université de Chicago à Paris. Donc, nous sommes le satellite, en quelque sorte, français de l'Université de Chicago. On a donc un petit campus, du moins une version campus à Paris, dans le 13e. Et en fait, on organise vraiment trois grands axes d'activité. Une activité pédagogique qui vraiment s'attache à enseigner des cours, souvent par des enseignants de l'Université de Chicago, à des étudiants de l'université qui viennent donc en France pour des programmes d'échange sur des programmes d'études à l'étranger. Nous facilitons aussi la recherche des chercheurs de l'Université de Chicago qui travaillent sur la France ou sur l'Europe et qui donc viennent séjourner avec nous quelque temps pour faciliter leurs travaux. Et puis donc finalement, c'est une ouverture, notre troisième axe, c'est plutôt une ouverture sur la scène académique et intellectuelle européenne et parisienne, ou du moins française, où en fait on essaye de se charger d'organiser des activités, des partenariats, des collaborations avec des chercheurs, institutions, universités françaises. Et dans ce cadre-là, nous avons donc ce programme d'appel à projet qui en fait invite des chercheurs à envoyer des dossiers d'inscription et on offre des financements relativement modestes. Et puis en contrepartie, on met aussi à disposition de ces chercheurs nos locaux, bien sûr, quand ils sont disponibles, lorsqu'il n'y a pas de restriction de voyage ou de couvre-feu ou de confinement. Et bien sûr, nous mettons aussi notre expertise à disposition des chercheurs. Donc, des gens de l'audience qui seraient intéressés, je les encourage à aller sur notre site web, à regarder, je crois que sous la rubrique Events, et ensuite, donc, il y a tout un intitulé, une présentation qui permet aux gens d'avoir accès à ces informations. Alors, avant de laisser la parole aux organisateurs, je me dois de mentionner une chose. Donc, c'est aussi assez innovateur, c'est-à-dire je crois que c'est une des premières fois où on travaille avec des traducteurs simultanés. Donc, je dirigerai les gens de l'audience. En fait, il y a trois options, il y a trois canaux qu'on peut utiliser. Donc, si vous bougez votre souris sur votre écran Zoom, vous verrez en bas, tout à droite, il y a un petit onglet sous forme de globe qui dit interprétation. Donc, vous avez en fait trois options qui est donc une, si vous êtes bilingue, vous pouvez en fait suivre les présentations dans n'importe quelle langue, auquel cas vous n'avez pas, vous pouvez rester donc sur la page de Zoom sur laquelle vous êtes. Et ensuite, vous avez une option anglaise, donc à savoir avoir des traductions en anglais de toutes les présentations françaises et ensuite vous aurez les présentations en anglais donc dans l'original et de même en français, donc vous avez une traduction française des présentations en anglais si vous en fait vous préférez avoir cette option. Et donc je voulais dire aussi aux intervenants et aux participants de parler bien près du micro lorsque vous faites vos présentations, de manière à ce que les traducteurs puissent bien entendre et puissent faciliter leur traduction automatique. Donc, ayant dit tout cela, je laisserai donc maintenant la parole aux organisateurs. Nous sommes encore très intéressés par le sujet. On vous souhaite une bonne chance, surtout une très bonne journée d'études. Et puis, on a grand hâte d'apprendre un petit peu sur ce sujet. Je dois admettre, moi, je ne connaissais pas grand-chose sur les terrains d'aventure, donc on y en fait 3 secondes de recherche sur Internet. C'est vrai ça a l'air d'être un monde particulièrement intéressant. Donc, merci de nous apporter ce colloque au centre de l'université. Bonne journée, bon courage, et puis en espérant une collaboration prochaine à nouveau.
Bonjour à toutes et à tous. Merci d'être présents du coup à ce workshop sur les terrains d'aventure qui a été organisé donc par le projet TAPLA avec du coup le soutien de l'Université de Chicago Centre à Paris que du coup j'en profite pour remercier d'ores et déjà pour son accompagnement et son accueil. Alors, le projet TAPLA, TAPLA, c'est l'acronyme en fait pour terrain d'aventure du passé pour l'avenir. L'objectif de ce projet, c'est de constituer un réseau de recherche en fait, portant spécifiquement sur les terrains d'aventure, envisagés comme des laboratoires d'expérimentation d'une pédagogie, de l'autonomie et du faire. Ce workshop, aujourd'hui, il a pour objectif d'ouvrir aux États-Unis le champ d'exploration de cette recherche qui, jusqu'à présent, est resté centré sur l'Europe. Alors, comment les terrains d'aventure qui sont apparus en Europe ont-ils pu se développer outre-Atlantique? Quelles filiations, différences ou complémentarités peut-on identifier entre les terrains d'aventure en Europe et les terrains d'aventure aux États-Unis? Quelle est la place également des terrains d'aventure aujourd'hui dans les politiques d'aménagement des espaces éducatifs et ludiques aux États-Unis? Voilà quelques-unes en fait, des questions que nous souhaiterions explorer durant cette demi-journée de workshop ensemble. Nous allons donc débuter notre workshop par une première table ronde qui est consacrée à la thématique de la diffusion des terrains d'aventure. Alors, je vous propose de commencer par écouter les coordinateurs du projet TAPLA, Gilles Raveneau et Clothilde Roullier. Donc Gilles Raveneau, qui est anthropologue, professeur à l'Université Lumière Lyon 2, au laboratoire EVS l'ESC, et qui va nous présenter le projet TAPLA. Puis on écoutera en suivant Clothilde Roullier, qui est responsable des fonds jeunesse et sport, éducation populaire aux archives nationales, et qui présentera le travail de cartographie et d'identification des sources disponibles pour la recherche sur les terrains d'aventure. Voilà, donc Gilles, je te laisse la parole pour la suite.
Très bien, merci, merci Aurélien. Remercie également peut-être nos deux traductrices, Marguerite Capel et Chloé Billon. Bon, très bien, parfait. Alors, je commencerai peut-être par deux informations, si vous voulez bien. La première concerne le blog de notre projet de recherche TAPLA, que vous trouverez donc à cette adresse, tapla.hypothèse.org, dans lequel vous découvrirez un certain nombre d'informations sur le projet et puis sur son actualité. Et puis la seconde information concerne l'appel à communication pour un colloque international et interdisciplinaire sur les terrains d'aventure, sur le sujet qui nous intéresse aujourd'hui, que nous venons tout juste de commencer à diffuser, qui se trouve aussi sur le blog. Alors, je voulais m'excuser auprès de nos collègues américains et anglais parce qu'on n'a pas encore eu le temps de leur transmettre la traduction de cet appel à communication la traduction vient de nous arriver aujourd'hui. Donc, vous aurez ce soir même cet appel à communication et on espère que cet appel retiendra votre attention et que vous nous ferez une proposition. Ce colloque se déroulera donc à Paris sur 3 jours, du 8 au 10 décembre 2021. Voilà. Alors, peut-être venons-en donc au projet, projet TAPLA. Donc, il est soutenu, comme disait Aurélien, par un LABEX. Le LABEX est passé dans le présent, qui est le LABEX de la communauté d'universités et d'établissements Paris Lumière. Et finalement, ce projet, on pourrait dire, pour le dire assez simplement, il vise à combler donc, le manque de connaissances sur les terrains d'aventure et à comprendre pourquoi, après une apparition tardive, on pourrait dire au début des années 70 en France, eh bien, ces terrains d'aventure ont progressivement disparu à la fin des années 80 et 90. Alors, ce projet, on pourrait dire qu'il tend à constituer un réseau de recherche européen pluridisciplinaire qui porte sur les terrains d'aventure comme laboratoire d'émancipation et d'expérimentation, on va dire de la place des enfants dans la ville. Et il vise, on pourrait dire, 2 choses principales. Premièrement, à comprendre l'héritage de ces dispositifs spatiaux et pédagogiques. Et puis, deuxièmement, à relancer cette expérience en France dans une démarche de recherche collaborative impliquant des associations d'éducation populaire, des collectivités territoriales, des institutions, des associations et des habitants qui sont intéressés par cette expérience. TAPLA est un projet de recherche fondé sur une double dimension, articulée l'une à l'autre. Une première dimension, on va dire, qui est une dimension rétrospective, qui scrute les traces du passé des terrains d'aventure pour mieux comprendre d'où ils viennent et quelles furent leurs conceptions, leurs formes, leurs usages. Et puis, une dimension prospective, hein, qui est plutôt tournée vers la compréhension du présent, de l'actualité, et aussi de l'avenir de ces terrains d'aventure. Ces deux dimensions renvoient elles-mêmes à deux orientations de la recherche, si vous voulez, qui s'articulent là aussi l'une à l'autre. On pourrait dire une recherche de type fondamental, classique, et une recherche de type recherche-action. Le projet associe donc les méthodes classiques des sciences sociales, entretien, observation, enquête ethnographique, consultation et travail sur archives, cartographie, etc., à la recherche-action, dans le but de susciter de nouvelles expérimentations, terrain d'aventure. Et à ce propos, une attention particulière, évidemment, est portée aux traces laissées par les anciens terrains, hein, à travers une recherche active de sources patrimoniales dans différents services d'archives qui visent à être rassemblés dans une base de données, et puis parallèlement par la constitution d'un corpus d'archives orales auprès d'anciens acteurs et aussi d'anciens enfants qui seront et qui sont déjà conservés aux archives nationales. La recherche est comparative. Elle a, outre la France, bien sûr, plusieurs pays européens, le Royaume-Uni, l'Allemagne, la Suisse, le Danemark, la Belgique. Et l'idée, c'est d'utiliser un protocole d'enquête commun permettant la comparaison pour documenter et recueillir les données en utilisant, on va dire, des plans et des cartes de l'évolution des sites étudiés, en faisant un suivi ethnographique des terrains, mêlant observation directe, observation participante, prise de vue vidéo, étude de documents produits sur ces expérimentations, entretien avec des acteurs de terrain d'aventure, comme avec des enfants qui l'utilisent, etc. La recherche vise aussi à cartographier les expériences passées, hein, et présentes aussi, hein, donc Clothilde Roullier, d'ailleurs, nous dira quelques mots par la suite. Alors, en ce qui concerne plus particulièrement la recherche-action et collaborative, TAPLA a pour objectif d'actualiser on va dire, le modèle des terrains d'aventure d'hier au contexte contemporain, en suscitant de nouvelles expérimentations pour penser autrement la place des enfants dans la ville. Pour cela, nous sommes associés au CNEA, qui sont experts dans le développement des méthodes d'éducation active, hein, et en capacité de former une génération d'animateurs et d'animatrices pour ces terrains. Si l'on prend l'exemple ici présenté visuellement de notre projet d'expérimentation donc en région parisienne à Villiers-le-Bel, l'idée est au départ de fabriquer et de partager une culture commune des terrains d'aventure, puis d'expérimenter en faisant un travail réflexif sur cette expérimentation pour enfin essaimer et diffuser l'expérience dans d'autres collectivités de la métropole francilienne. À ce jour en France, à ma connaissance, les villes engagées dans des projets d'expérimentation sont, outre Villiers-le-Bel, Bagnolet, La Charité-sur-Loire, Rambouillet, Angers, Cholet, Nantes, Orvault, Saint-Sébastien-sur-Loire, Saint-Nazaire, Rennes, Bordeaux et Marseille. Alors, ce projet comporte, on pourrait dire, pour faire bref, 5 axes de recherche. Le premier, fabriqué en joué en fabricant, qui vise à interroger la mobilisation du jeu comme activité productrice d'espace, hein, et conduit ainsi à réinterroger les modèles classiques de conception des espaces de jeu comme les projets éducatifs qui y sont associés. Le deuxième, co-construire les espaces éducatifs, où nous faisons l'hypothèse que le retour de ces typologies d'espaces de jeu induit une actualisation des formes de contrôle socio-spatial qui va au-delà des enfants, hein, pour s'étendre à l'ensemble des usagers. Le troisième, recyclage et réemploi des matériaux, cherche à comprendre, on pourrait dire, une économie de projets inscrite dans des logiques de gestion des ressources en fonction des besoins des usagers. Le quatrième, pouvoir d'agir, prise de risque et prise d'autonomie, se focalise, lui, sur la liberté et la prise de risque donnée aux enfants dans les terrains d'aventure. Et il ouvre à une interrogation essentielle, à notre sens, quant à la capacité de transformation sociale et politique de ce dispositif à l'heure où, justement, les questions de sécurité priment souvent, comme chacun d'entre nous le sait ici, sur tout le reste généralement. Enfin, le dernier axe, nouvelle forme de pédagogie de plein air, interroge les filiations, les prolongements et les éventuels décrochages entre les terrains d'aventure tels que pensés et mis en œuvre pendant les 30 Glorieuses et le champ de l'éducation à l'environnement comme les écoles dans la nature, par exemple, telles qu'elles émergent aujourd'hui dans le contexte français. Pour conclure, on pourrait dire que les terrains d'aventure, comme objet hybride, comme espace ludique et éducatif, à la fois aire de jeu et jardin, lieu de récréation et de bricolage, utilisant des matériaux de récupération, espace en perpétuelle construction, eh bien, les terrains d'aventure invitent précisément au croisement des perspectives disciplinaires, ainsi qu'à des collaborations entre chercheurs et acteurs de terrain. Cela conduit donc à dire un mot de l'équipe de chercheurs constituée par ce projet. L'équipe, vous n'en serez pas surprise, est pluridisciplinaire et composée d'enseignants-chercheurs appartenant à l'anthropologie, à l'histoire, aux archives, à la sociologie urbaine, aux sciences de l'éducation, à la géographie comme à la philosophie, mais aussi à l'urbanisme, l'architecture et le paysage, on va dire sans compter évidemment les compétences nombreuses et diversifiées mobilisées par les acteurs de terrain et les professionnels avec lesquels nous collaborons dans une forme de recherche collaborative visant à expérimenter de nouveaux terrains en France. Voilà. On pourrait dire que je m'arrêterai là pour ne pas être trop long. Je vous remercie et je donne la parole tout de suite à Clothilde Roullier, chargée d'études documentaires aux Archives nationales. Merci.
Donc effectivement, moi je travaille aux Archives nationales en France. Les Archives nationales françaises sont un des plus grands centres d'archives d'Europe, puisque la France est un pays extrêmement centralisé. Au centre où je travaille, à Pierrefitte-sur-Seine, en banlieue nord de Paris, nous conservons à peu près 400 km linéaires d'archives. Donc, si on calcule ça en distance américaine, les Américains comptant plutôt en temps de parcours, il faut au moins 4 heures de route, sans doute, pour pouvoir aller d'un point à un autre de nos archives. Et donc, j'ai entrepris ce travail de recherche de sources concernant les terrains d'aventure, non seulement aux Archives nationales, donc non seulement dans les archives de l'État français, mais également dans différents services d'archives du territoire, donc au niveau du département et des communes. Nous avons lancé un appel global à tous les services du territoire. Et puis, nous avons également envoyé des demandes à différents services d'archives européens, essentiellement au Royaume-Uni, en Suisse, Allemagne, Danemark, Pays-Bas, enfin tous les pays où nous savions qu'il y avait eu des terrains d'aventure. Donc, à partir de là, on a réussi à produire un guide des sources qui fait actuellement 104 pages, qui est disponible sur notre blog que Gilles a présenté tout à l'heure. Et donc, on souhaiterait continuer à alimenter ce guide des sources au niveau européen, mais également voir dans quelle mesure nous pourrions l'enrichir avec des sources américaines. Donc, c'est comme ça que j'ai commencé à mener l'enquête côté américain et que j'ai fait la rencontre avec Katie Ehrlich, qui prendra la parole tout à l'heure. Mais on est encore très, très loin de pouvoir présenter quelque chose d'écrit. Donc, à ce stade, les sources américaines ne sont pas présentes dans ce guide. Alors, un guide des sources, ce n'est pas un guide qui donne les archives. Un guide des sources décrit seulement les archives disponibles. Donc, c'est pour ça aussi que ça tient finalement en si peu de pages. 100 pages sur les terrains d'aventure, ce n'est pas beaucoup comparé à l'ensemble des documents disponibles. Mais je voulais quand même vous montrer le genre de documents que j'ai pu trouver en réalisant ce guide. Donc, voici par exemple le plan d'un terrain, qui existait dans les années 1980 en France, dans le nord de la France, oui, à Lille. Et alors, ce plan-là est particulièrement intéressant parce que c'est un plan qui montre l'évolution du terrain au fil du temps et qui essaie de dater en 1988, 1991, 1992, ce qu'il y avait sur le terrain. Donc, avec des petits numéros qui renvoient, avec les pastilles à côté, aux légendes, donc aux éléments constitutifs du terrain. Et alors, on voit par exemple qu'il y a plusieurs endroits du feu, FEU, donc qui était vraiment un élément important des premiers terrains d'aventure, qui pose aujourd'hui, bien sûr, davantage de problèmes. Et on voit aussi quelque chose d'assez spectaculaire au milieu, au numéro 4, là, c'est le téléphérique. Donc, ce qu'on appelait, j'imagine, téléphérique sur un terrain d'aventure, c'était sans doute plutôt une tyrolienne, enfin quelque chose qui permettait probablement aux enfants de pouvoir glisser d'un point à un autre, hein, sans doute pas un téléphérique comme à la montagne avec une cabine. Mais en tout cas, voilà, tous ces éléments-là, quand même assez excitants. Donc, qui permettent aussi, je pense, de pouvoir éventuellement travailler dans une confrontation entre terrains et éventuellement entre pays aussi, à partir d'éléments extrêmement concrets de ce type-là. Si on pouvait trouver dans les différents pays, éventuellement pour des périodes similaires, des plans de ce type-là, on pourrait peut-être arriver à confronter de façon relativement précise la façon dont les terrains d'aventure ont fonctionné dans le passé et puis bien sûr continuer à faire la même chose aujourd'hui, puisque dans les terrains qu'on a l'intention de bâtir, on souhaite aussi faire une cartographie du dessin, etc. et documenter le mieux possible le terrain depuis le choix du terrain jusqu'à son aboutissement. Alors ensuite, la cartographie, à partir de cette recherche de sources, on a commencé à se dire que ce serait bien de rendre compte de l'ensemble des terrains qu'on avait pu trouver. Et donc là, on a essayé d'entreprendre une cartographie mondiale, cette fois des terrains, avec différentes sources trouvées au fil de la recherche et l'aide aussi de certains des intervenants d'aujourd'hui. Donc, cette cartographie permet de voir des tranches d'apparition des terrains depuis les années 40 jusqu'à aujourd'hui. Hein. Donc, le jaune, c'est les premiers, le bleu, c'est les terrains d'aujourd'hui. Et dans la zone rouge, c'est la zone intermédiaire, mais très intense, très dense, des années 1970-1980. On ne peut pas voir sur la carte les dates de disparition des terrains puisque généralement, on ne connaît pas ces dates. C'est-à-dire que les archives, en général, sont produites au moment où les terrains sont créés parce qu'il faut toutes sortes d'autorisations qui donnent lieu à la production de documents, notamment. Mais en revanche, lorsque les terrains disparaissent, c'est un peu comme des petites associations, si vous voulez. Généralement, ça laisse peu de traces. Donc, malheureusement, c'est beaucoup plus difficile d'avoir des dates de disparition des terrains. Mais ce serait intéressant à terme d'avoir quand même les deux données. Alors, ça posera d'autres problèmes de représentation sur la carte, mais voilà, d'avoir aussi la date de disparition des terrains en question. Et puis, on souhaiterait aussi pouvoir augmenter la qualité de ces données en y ajoutant éventuellement des images et éventuellement aussi faire une carte sonore en y ajoutant des extraits de témoignages de personnes qui ont pu connaître les terrains en question. Voilà, donc faire vraiment une carte multimédia. Et puis enfin, dernière chose, on souhaiterait aussi peut-être ouvrir cette carte à la collaboration, en faire un outil collaboratif ouvert à tous, puisqu'elle est faite à partir du logiciel OpenStreetMap, donc qui est un logiciel libre qui permet à tous de contribuer. Donc ça, on réfléchit actuellement à une façon possible d'ouvrir la cartographie à voilà, soit un nombre restreint de collaborateurs un peu experts, soit vraiment à tout le monde. Donc, je voulais juste vous montrer là pour finir la façon dont on peut consulter la carte. On peut soit tout regarder d'un coup, soit appliquer des filtres. Par exemple, si on ne souhaite voir que les premiers terrains, eh bien voilà, on a les 3 pastilles jaunes là, qui apparaissent. Hein. Le premier terrain du Danemark de 1943, puis au Royaume-Uni 48, puis aux États-Unis dans le Minnesota en 1949. Et donc, ces informations plus précises sont données lorsqu'on survole les pastilles avec la souris de l'ordinateur qui nous donne le détail de ce que nous avons pu trouver sur chaque terrain. Voilà. Donc, je suis ravie maintenant de laisser la parole à ma collègue de New York, Cathy Ehrlich, qui a trouvé voilà, un document qui, a priori, n'a encore été vu sans doute par aucun chercheur, qui concerne le terrain d'aventure de Central Park, qui a ouvert en 1967. Donc, je lui laisse la parole.
I really wasn't well-versed in adventure playgrounds before you reached out with this request. So you know, this is kind of a new research topic for us. So thank you very much for having us. My name is Katie Ehrlich. I work at the Municipal Archives in New York City. Today I was just going to talk briefly about the documents that I found related to the 67th Street Adventure Playground, and also just a little bit about our archives and our collection of parks material, which is incredibly extensive. So this is our lovely Municipal Archives building, just an old photo of that. We are located in the Surrogates Courthouse in downtown New York, and that's a picture of the lobby. Let's see. Okay, so at the New York City Municipal Archives, we have approximately 250,000 plus cubic feet of records in 3 different locations. We have records dating from the mid-1600s in the New York City colonial period to pretty much the present. And we preserve and provide access to the records of New York City government. Some of our major areas of collecting include mayoral records, Dutch colonial records. We have extensive photographs of everything from parks and events to infrastructure, sewers, waterways, etc. We also have extensive property records, and which is a big source of where our researchers come from. And some of our largest city agency records include the New York City Board of Education, the Departments of Parks and Recreation, and the Department of Health. We have a lot of different types of parks collections, including early Central Park drawings from the 19th century, Parks Commissioners records, including the kind of all-encompassing, all-important Robert Moses, who has left an indelible mark on New York City as the city's primary planner in the whole of the 20th century, and also photographs as well as general files, which is where the documents that I'm going to show you came from, our Parks General Files collection, which dates from the 30s to 1966, unfortunately cutting off right before the 67th Street Adventure Playground was actually built. Unfortunately. That's just a quote about Robert Moses that I wanted to share. Just a couple of other pictures of New York City parks throughout the years. This is a Robert Moses New Deal era swimming pool that was built actually not too far from my apartment in Queens. Also in Queens, the site of the 1965 World's Fair, Flushing Meadows, Corona Park. We have extensive records in all of these areas. This is a picture of Central Park, sadly, probably just after the creation of the playground. When the park was overused and the city had no money, and the city was in pretty dire straits at that point. Another example of a Central Park drawing from the 19th century. Okay, now quickly, so basically for every year in every borough, Manhattan, Queens, Bronx, etc., there are folders in the Parks and Recreation's general files just labeled playgrounds and no other specific information. So when I was asked to look into the 67th Street playground, and as I said, the collection only goes up to 1966, and the playground itself was created, or I guess formally established in 1967. I wanted to take a look through the previous year's playground files just to make sure that I had done my due diligence with this request. So as you can see, there are 12 folders titled Playgrounds. And lucky for me, I found these documents in the first folder, but I continued to look through all the folders anyway. This is just a picture of in our warehouse where the Parks General files are, and a picture of the box that contained the documents that I found. And there we go. So there are 2 memos and a packet of sketches for the playground that I found. So this is just kind of a Parks Department general memo about meeting with the architect of the adventure playground. And I believe we can make these available to anyone who wants to see them afterwards. This is from a memo from the architect containing the a little bit about the playground philosophy. Child should be able to exert some influence over his own environment, creative play. These were all kind of phrases that struck me as very modern and current. So it was interesting to see, to me, that they came from the late 1960s. Also interesting is the memo says this project is to be a prototype of future projects. So that's interesting, but I'm pretty sure it's still the only adventure playground in New York City. And then the rest of these documents are sketches of the playground, which I thought were pretty interesting because obviously it doesn't look like your typical swing set slide playground. We'll just go through these. So there's also that. Different play equipment and kind of sketches of how they might look. There's a little forest area. That is all for the document. Again, I believe we can make these available to anyone who wants to see them. And I think it's probably worth someone doing even more research in the Parks collection because you know, you never know what you might find and it's extremely extensive. So, thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Cathy, pour cette présentation intéressante et du coup, tous ces nouveaux documents qu'on découvre. Peut-être après ce premier tour d'horizon du travail archivistique et cartographique, je vous propose qu'on écoute maintenant Monsieur Robin Moore, qui est professeur de paysage, d'architecture du paysage, et également directeur du Natural Learning Initiative à l'Université de Caroline du Nord. Donc, Monsieur Moore va nous proposer un aperçu en fait, mondial de l'implantation des terrains d'aventure. Alors, je vais vous donner la parole.
Anyway, good afternoon, good morning, and thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this. I'm really honored. I'm very interested in what's going on here, and congratulations on all of the work that you've done thus far. It's very impressive, very exciting. It's fantastic. I'm an architect and urban planner by background, and I've been working in this space for some decades. So let's go ahead. In 1987, was able to visit the original site there in Copenhagen more than 20 years after I had really started working on ideas related to adventure playgrounds and play work and play leadership, you know, which is all the kind of integration of these two concepts. So that was a big event through the International Play Association, which I don't know if you reached out to them, but they can help a lot here. I was involved in that organization for many, many years and was the president, etc. So we know that in 1954, Lady Ellen of Hertford brought this whole idea to the UK. I'm originally from the UK. I was born in London. And so this is very close to me, all of this history. And, you know, the history started to take off pretty fast in the 50s, late 50s, early 60s. This is an interesting document on the top right here, 1961. Colin Ward, you may know him, very well known writer, independent thinker in the UK, picked up on this idea in relation to the theory of anarchism, not the way we think about it usually. And these documents were populated with very commonplace, as we can see, classic adventure playground images. Jubilee Street was picked up by the BBC in 1978. So, you know, a lot of things were going on. Maybe some of you know these documents. I have a quite extensive library of all of this. The National Playing Fields Association in the UK, Adventure Playgrounds by Lambert and Pearson, 74. Lady Ellen of Hertford, who was a landscape architect, brought the concept of adventure play related to children with special needs, as we would say these days. Arvid Bengtsson, who was the director of the park system in Göteborg in Sweden, a very influential figure at this time. And Bob Hughes, who is the guru in the UK. And I highly recommend this very early document, 1975, Notes for Adventure Play Workers. Fantastic. You know, if you read that, you're on your way. And then at the bottom here, on a visit to Paris, I don't have a record of this guy's name, but there were lots of things happening in Paris in the 70s. And I should also recognize Don Bach, who was a very early leader, was a play leader on the Lollard Adventure Playground, and incredible photographs here, and the archive that he's created in the Victoria and Albert Museum. So there's a lot going on here. In 1970, Claire Cooper, who is also a Brit, met up with her at the University of California, Berkeley, where I was on the faculty, did a very well-known essay in the Landscape Architecture magazine here in the United States. That was putting it on the table with landscape architecture, I should say. And then also there's an individual in New York, Nancy Rudolph, who was a professional photographer I met several times. She wrote a book called Workyards, and I've mislaid my copy, but 1974, so that's something to follow up. And on it goes. So Lederman and Trassell were writing about adventure playgrounds and things going on in Germany at that same period. Incredible, adventuresome landscapes. And then the Danish Playground Association produced you probably know the document, 1981, with a an English translation. So on that same visit in 87, we visited some absolutely classic, wonderful adventure playgrounds in the Danish context, many involvements of animals. I wrote about that in 93 in the Complete Playground book. And so it goes. And then in Sweden, this was a play park. So there's a mix between adventure playgrounds and play parks. And you know, there's a whole kind of model there that would be worth unearthing. So this was Soapbox Derby. What struck me was the kids, the adolescents, even from a fairly early age, had access to this workshop that was part of the playground where they could tinker around. You know, things now that we call STEM were already underway there in the 1980s. And then our very good friends in Munich have been at this work for 30 plus years with mobile programs across the city. Go to their website, Spielkultur. Lot going on still. They're showing up in our conference later this month. They had a program called Mini Munich where they developed the whole city of Munich and the Olympic Park, which is an incredible model of indoors where the kids were mirroring all of the politics and systems of the city. And then also the adventure playground movement went to Japan, as you probably know, with the Hennegi play park, as they call it, but it was really an adventure playground, still alive and well, and many other interventions in Japan. So up to date now, so that the writing about adventure playgrounds continues, right? Kozlowski's book is excellent historical record, and other people that are even on this program today, and Harry Shah's 1981 project. So speaking for myself, I started, I had already followed this idea when I was doing my graduate work at MIT, and decided to try to test the adventure playground idea and to compare systematically the patterns of behaviors on a very low cost intervention in a public housing project with African-American community. And at one end of the playground was these loose parts, as we would say, bottom left-hand side, and then some other kinds of equipment constructed with volunteers, and then you see adolescents playing basketball at the other end, a whole long story. But I was trying to invent some kind of environment behavior, ethnographic type systems for observing behavior. There was no literature at that time. This is 1966, 67. And I realized very rapidly that the loose parts at this end of the playground were occupying children for hours on end, even days on end, versus play on this equipment, which is still important, but you would measure that in minutes instead of hours or days. So I learned a lot from that experience. Here, these guys were on this, just messing around with scrap material for endlessly. And that work was published in Lady Ellen Hurtwood's book, and in the first environmental psychology volume in the UK. And so from that, I went to Berkeley and thought, okay, this needs to be in a school system. So we did the environmental yard, which went on for many, many years, converting asphalt into a living landscape, working with the teachers, working with the community, and then working through summer programs involving artists, working with children from the neighborhood, from the city, using that environment. So we learned a tremendous amount here. So this is about play work and how we can intersect that with the natural world and do things in a different kind of way. The play work notion of creating a script with the children. Here's Treasure Island acted out in that environment, you know, just wonderful, a lot of fun, a lot of work on intercultural drama. So using language to bring people together. So with that experience underway, I was invited to give a presentation in the IPA Milan meeting at 1975, and already was thinking about, there's the adventure playground, but there's adventure play. They're two different things. They're brought together through play work on an adventure playground with materials, and it has a physicality, but there's also, I mean, it's a very big idea. In that meeting in Milan, I have to mention that Valia Tanon, I don't know if you've unearthed her name in your research, was a psychologist, a very important leader in France of the movement, very passionate about adventure playgrounds. And also with, also at that meeting was Jacques Simon. I don't know if you must have found him, wrote the book in 1976, very forward-thinking effort in those days. So I've worked with that model really now for decades and brought it back to North Carolina prior to when I became a professor at NLI, bringing this kind of work to the city park system, using now a much wider range of material, these industrial cast-off products with a lot of creativity was amazing, was just incredible. Training play workers to do this work, my students, and then with the state art museum, we did a kind of scrap city. It was called Fantasy City for one weekend, huge scale, piles of scrap. And it was amazing to see how people just jumped into this, and you didn't really have to tell them anything. They got the message straight away about how to do this, and it was just incredible. So this is an adventure playground, right? This is in a different context. It's let's construct our church, this family said. And then we took that learning to the Brookfield Zoo. So this was the Animal Homes piece of the Hamill Family Play Zoo, which was the first zoo in the country to adopt a playful, emotional response to nature attitude through play. And we brought the play work notion to the team here. So they're called play partners, but they really follow the same kind of idea of working collaboratively with children to create things that interest them in this kind of open space environment, with arts, with culture, with night shows, with always about animals, always about me being the animal. How am I modeling the animal? How am I expressing the animal? And this is a sidebar. This seems to me to intersect with the whole city farm movement, which shows up across the world. Again, invented in Europe, came to the United States. There's lots of stories here, but there's an intersection here which is really worth considering. And then, at least in the US, there's a big nature play movement. So we're involved in this, and this is just a scrap of woodland managed by the Parks Department to create loose parts, recycled things where the kids can, from the neighborhood, just mess around in nature and enjoy things. But it's run by the Parks Department, it's managed by the Parks Department. Another area, another kind of model, nature centers. This is in Ohio, the Cincinnati Nature Center, where we actually trained the landscape architects to work on this incredible project about to a little bit under a hectare. This is what it looks like. So it's kind of a community space with a very creative landscape. Obviously, it's been installed where children are playing all kinds of games and so forth. And there's, again, this kind of educational angle. And it was interesting for me to hear the comments by Gilles early on about education and learning and trying to make an intersection between those two. This is learning science. This is non-formal education. This is tacit learning. Parents and kids working together in this fixed, loose, flexible, managed outdoor adventure play and learning area, as we would call it. And even in small scale, you don't need much to make it happen. So finally, we brought all of that learning to a much more ambitious project in a national wildlife refuge in the US on the East Coast, and working with training interns from across the states, working with local children to celebrate the wildlife of that refuge, which included black bears, migratory birds, insect life, of course, turtles, and alligators. And so we worked with the children to invent these kind of scenarios or scripts for adventure play in the forest. This is untamed forest that we're working with, and the kids come up with all different kinds of ideas. So it's partly language also, and you see some of what I just said. There's a bottom left there, a turtle. So this is a little bit more than adventure play. And so in 1809, I already was talking about, okay, which way are we going? Are we going with industrialized playgrounds? Or are we going with these kinds of concepts of freedom and empowering children and helping them gain agency and be successful in life with all of the different possibilities? And now at this point, we deal a lot still with risk, and this is an important document, 2013 by Joan Ullman. Or on the left, the industry have captured the term, and there's, I think, still confusion in the public sense of what an adventure playground is and what this is all about. So we need to work on it. So just a closing thought, for me, this is about cultural transformation. And this point in history of the planet, with global warming and all of the threats towards biodiversity, I think this is one direction that we need to move in. And of course, all of the other social issues and unrest and political problems that we're facing, all of that can be incorporated in this broad idea of adventure play, adventure work, play work, and cultural transformation. I always turn to Anna Arendt, who I think beyond anyone I can think of, really captured this idea of how children inherit the world and how we have to work with them to reinvent the world every generation. So play work as are the agents of cultural change for me. And the sites of play work, the, let's say, substitute or surrogate playgrounds are, of course, the adventure playgrounds themselves, but also nature centers and all of the things on the list there, including schools. Maybe, can we get the schools involved? Certainly the progressive independent schools are involved. There's a lot of different places where this can happen. So thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup pour cette présentation, ce tour d'horizon et le partage de toute cette expérience. Je vous propose qu'on finisse notre première table ronde en écoutant deux membres donc, de l'association Pop-Up Adventure. Donc, c'est les deux tutrices de cette association, Susanna Lowe, qui est coordinatrice de projet pour cette association, et Morgan Leicester-Saxby, qui est responsable des ressources et des contenus et qui est également doctorante sur le playwork auprès de Fraser Brown, que nous écouterons à la table ronde suivante. Donc, elle nous propose une comparaison entre les terrains d'aventure en Angleterre et aux États-Unis. Je vous propose qu'après cette présentation, ce sera donc la fin de notre table ronde, on prenne un peu de temps du coup pour échanger. On aura un petit quart d'heure pour échanger, 20 minutes pardon, pour discuter et échanger sur ces premières présentations.
Hey, there we go. We've been invited to talk about a UK-US comparison of adventure playgrounds, which is interesting because we are based in the UK and the US. I think I forgot to send my bio over, so please let me introduce myself. I'm Susanna. I'm based in Manchester in the UK, and I'm also doing a PhD with Professor Fraser Brown, who we will see later. I'm doing an interesting PhD, well, I think it's interesting, on a potential play movement in the US, which I'm writing up now. Should be almost done, but I'm hoping some of that can help with the discussion today.
Yes. Hi, and I'm Morgan Leicester-Saxby. I was trained in the UK in playwork and worked on a bunch of adventure playgrounds there, primarily in London, but I was born and currently live in the US. So I feel very much attached to this, to the topic of this presentation.
Absolutely.
Also, personally, my background before this was in anthropology and urban planning. And in making that shift towards actually working on adventure playgrounds, it's also affected just a change for me in thinking not so much about them as built environments, but as provision for children.
So we're Pop-Up Adventure Play. We are the only two people who run this tiny organization, but we have been working internationally with over 30 different countries. So we're in a privileged position to be able to visit a lot of spaces and hear firsthand from people about their experiences about play and about their adventure play histories in their countries. Of course, with playwork having such a history in the UK and us both being trained playworkers, this has been really helpful as well. So we're hoping that we can shed a little light in the adventure playground world as well for today's discussion.
And we wanted to start with a quote from Bertelsen. It's like a classic touchstone in playwork that I cannot and indeed will not teach the children anything, just to really emphasize that playwork is explicitly non-educational. We recognize that these sites are places where a lot of learning can happen, undoubtedly, but that we have no pedagogy. We are not trying to teach them anything. And in fact, a huge part of playwork as an approach is unpacking our own agenda and reducing our impact on what children want to be doing.
This is a quote from Benjamin, which Robin showed the front cover of earlier. There is a lot of great stuff on adventure playgrounds where tools can be used and materials can be had and stuff can be built and destroyed and made their own. But this is a really great definition of what an adventure playground, or a junk playground as it was first perceived as. And it's just maybe we should you know, have a little think about what that might look like. An adventure playground is a space for children to do whatever they need on it. Sometimes it involves building, sometimes it involves laying on the ground and looking at the clouds. But an adventure playground is a child space, and adults, they don't co-create it necessarily. They are there to make the realities of the children happen.
We wanted to start with just a few images of like older adventure playgrounds in the UK, just to really emphasize that what we see happening in the UK, the training opportunities that are available, the material resources for playworkers, the sites themselves have this like long, fascinating history.
These photos were borrowed and allowed for us to use by Mr. John Buck. We haven't been existing that long, unfortunately, to be there for these photos.
But what some of these really emphasize too is the incredible ingenuity of these spaces and what children are able to build even with very little in the way of resources when they have time and freedom and support.
We love this picture, the one with the six.
Isn't it amazing? And that these spaces, these original adventure playgrounds, were hotly contested in a lot of cases and incredibly important community locations. Places, yeah, that became like the heart of these residential communities in a very different way.
There's a lot of old photos, but we want to bring it back to now. Here it's in color now, it's starting to change, and here we are in the UK, Meriden Adventure Playground, that is overseen by our lovely friend Ali Wood. It's a great space. This has been around for a while. Completely community owned, and it has had lots of funding and then had all of its funding removed and then had funding returned, but because of the community they helped to find that money, and it continues to run as a community focused adventure playground. It's wonderful, and you can see all the structures here. You can kind of tell that it is not made by children, these structures. They're very well built and very incredibly neat. So somebody had a hand in creating these. But I have no doubt that these were all child initiated in terms of the play workers in the space identified that children needed height, so they made things taller. They identified children needed smaller spaces to interact in, so they created sheltered den or cubby or fort making spaces. So this adventure playground has been here for a while, and adults are welcome to hang out in their community room as well. So that's really great to see that it's really an integral part of their neighborhood and their community. This is a photo from the land. I'm sure that you may come across some images of the land, and certainly newspaper articles and a wonderful documentary. Yeah, made by Erin Davis, a friend of Pop-Up Adventure Play. This space is reasonably new. I want to say just over 10 years it's been around, and you can see there's much less structure. It is stuff. And this is a space, and I've had the privilege of being able to visit this space. It is a space full of possibility. You walk in and anything can happen. And that's what I would imagine as an adventure playground. That feeling of freeness is really important, and something that should be captured by all adventure playgrounds.
Yeah, absolutely. And it really emphasizes that untidiness to me in a way that like speaks to what is so beautiful about like the heart of this idea. We also we work very closely with a number of adventure playground like founders and leaders in the US. This is Eureka Villa Adventure Playground, which is in California, and Coop in Champaign-Urbana. Both of these have done like really beautiful work as part of a new generation in the US. The US has a longer history that we're not really touching on because we know that like, Riley's got it. But just to emphasize that there is this like new wave of adventure playgrounds in the US who have been developing different like self-funding models, right? So they tend to operate as after-school programs or summer camps. And this one's one of our favorites. It's in Houston, Texas, at the Parish School. It's an after-school program primarily, where all of the children who attend have like one or several learning or language-based differences. And one of the reasons why we keep emphasizing the importance of this site is because what they've really been doing so beautifully is developing play work as an approach, really looking at the nuances of play support in all of the different ways that we can, help kids.
The not to put anybody on the spot, but this adventure playground is often left off adventure playground lists simply because it is based within a school and is traditionally, adventure playgrounds are on spaces that aren't associated with schools, generally speaking. But this space is beautiful. They have their own, they run their own programs, they do their own thing, and they're on a land that is on the school grounds, but nothing to do with the school except for the bathrooms. And it is run by play workers who are so very careful about working with the children, and they create their own things and do their own follow their own lines of inquiry and have their own adventures, and it's beautiful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And this is an adventure playground currently operating in New York City. It is a fantastic site doing really excellent practice, also as a summer camp, which is another really interesting response, I think, to the difference between the US and the UK context. Historically, in the UK, adventure playgrounds were very specific to that residential community. And that's less so the case in the US for a bunch of different reasons. And instead, this response of structuring it as a summer camp, I think as an American, is genius because it locates these spaces, this freedom, this risk, this like nostalgic value in some ways. It locates it within a very American idea of a summer camp. So it makes it easier for parents to say yes to. And at the same time, it creates an opportunity for children to be together in very like intense ways for 1 week or several weeks.
So what's interesting about the photos we've selected for today's presentation is that they all seem to involve some sort of structure. Now, if we're talking about a comparison of adventure playgrounds, this is going to be something that is worth looking out for. We talked about this at length a few days ago, and we realized that it's not the structure necessarily that makes the adventure playground. We've talked about this before. It's about the children. It is about the adventure, it's about the freedom. But what's interesting is that our adult perception of adventure playgrounds always seems to point the camera at some sort of structure because like that's easy to take a picture of. It's very difficult to take a picture of a game of daydreaming or an adventure that's around a narrative of something that's invisible in a child's hand. So structures are a part of adventure playgrounds, and it's also something that seems really fundamental and foundational in a child's play, that they create their own spaces, that they make their own little homes, and as soon as those spaces are made, those little houses, it seems to say that the children know that this is theirs, and they're creating their own spaces within the space to call their own. And that's a lovely little thing to see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, building is an enormous part of adventure playgrounds because it's an enormous part of children's play. And hypothetically, on an adventure playground where children weren't interested in building, there should be no building.
And of course, we have heard of adventure playgrounds where there were no building, and much of the time that the children wanted to be there, they just wanted to dig, and that's okay if they want to do that. For many of the pop-up adventure playgrounds the children just want to move things from A to B because that's something they're not allowed to do when they're at home. So they move and move and move and move and move, and that's okay because that's what they want to do, and that's play.
Yeah. Which is why, as an organization, we really maintain an emphasis on play work, on the approach, and how we are interacting with children around their play, and how we're doing so as respectfully and carefully as possible. This is a picture from Conference, which is an event that we've organized that brings together play workers and play work students from all around the world.
Yeah, this is a photo from 2019, our second conference. Our third one can't happen this year, unfortunately, because of COVID. But these are folks who are really coming together to talk about play work in a context that is interesting and new. And the only reason why I say that is because that play work is traditionally on adventure playgrounds in very specific spaces, but a lot of these people don't have the luxury of that space, and they don't have the luxury of coming to the UK and doing a qualification. These people are learning on the job, and they are finding whatever resources they can and scraping together things that they can do in unusual locations. Some people are on patches of wild land, other people are on car parks. While this is not new, because play rangers have been working in the UK for years now, in unusual contexts, these folks are also not in the UK. Most of them are from the US, and we think are the new wave of adventure playground folk. And some of them are the only person in their whole city who knows about play work and who understands that children need more play opportunities in their neighborhoods, and they can't find anybody who wants to talk about it. So here they all are, 100 people. Yes. So we just selected this picture because ultimately adventure playgrounds are about the child, the one child. It starts here. If we impose our ideas and our thoughts and our motives behind the play, it is probably not play anymore. It is something else. Not to say that we can't impose some things on it, but if we well and truly are trying to create adventurous play spaces for children across the world with them in the heart of it all, then we need to start here. We need to start with the child. And we have had the privilege, again, of visiting lots of adventure playgrounds and adventurous play spaces. And we continue to support play advocates who are doing that around the world. And we just want to tell folks about how great play work is, because it takes the child as the middle point and the center point of play, and works from there. So we hope that we can all do that as we continue to learn more about adventure play.
Merci beaucoup à toutes les deux, Susanna et Morgane. Merci pour ce partage d'expérience.
Thank you. Get in contact.
On n'hésitera pas. Merci beaucoup. Peut-être que je vais lancer sur un sujet qui m'a intéressé particulièrement dans la présentation de Susanna et Morgane. Vous avez mis l'accent sur le fait qu'un terrain d'aventure ne se traduisait pas nécessairement par des constructions. Ça pouvait aussi se matérialiser par d'autres choses. Ça n'était pas nécessairement par la construction d'objets, de bâtiments qu'on identifie un terrain d'aventure. Est-ce que vous pouvez nous parler un peu plus de cette idée?
Absolutely. Children play in many different ways, and I think that a lot of the time that we assume that KFC playgrounds, kit fence carpet playgrounds. A lot of people assume that that's the only way that children play, but that favors a very specific type of play within a repertoire of many different play types. So the same with like the little houses, they are only one type of play, and we have to provide room for all the types that can possibly exist. If you want to find out more, Bob Hughes has many.
Yeah, there's a lovely quote that the real adventure is in the mind of the child.
Abernethy.
Abernethy, yeah. And I think that that's so important for us to remember, that a lot of the really intense and important moments of childhood play are invisible from the outside, and certainly invisible to adults, because we're often not very good at being in connection with those signs, unless we're trying, right? Unless we're practicing. So I think that for me, part of the interest that we have in buildings is that it's very attractive to us. Like, we love this stuff. We wish that, that was our backyard. And that desire is a great motivator, and we should be wary of it, honestly. There's a word in playwork for when our agenda impacts children's play, and it's adulteration.
It's a great word.
It's a great word.
Yeah. And when adulteration happens, you can almost always see it's a lot cleaner and tidier, and it seems to have a purpose. Whereas when children do things, it doesn't seem to make any sense, but that's the whole point. They do it and it has to make sense to them. It doesn't have to make any sense to us at all. And if we push our adult agenda on stuff, it becomes too clean almost. We have to let the kids get on with it.
If you're thinking of a specific site and you're wondering how adulterated it might be, a really good test is to close your eyes and identify whether you hear adult voices or children's voices.
Ok, merci pour ces précisions. C'est très intéressant, la notion de adulteration. C'est très efficace, effectivement.
I'm very much I think one just observation, we're living in very different times than we were when adventure playgrounds were invented. I don't think we can turn our backs on the social and environmental issues that we're facing globally at this point. And so it's interesting to talk about the relationships here between children and adults and how those relationships are mediated. So, I'm for diving deep in here, and I can feel some controversy in the background, maybe from what I said, but I think there's a very subtle relationship that is hard to capture. It's not anything to do with imposing things on children. It's to do with creating a space where there is freedom of expression and many different kinds of things to work with. It's not about building particularly. It's about certainly using the physical world as a means of expression in all kinds of ways. I think you saw some of that in my slides. It's certainly not something permanent, right? So that's very antithetical to adventure play, that it takes on the permanence. And you guys from the UK, the US, UK, talked about that in I think it was the Birmingham example, which I saw a lot going on in the UK when I was working there in the late 1970s, early 80s. The play workers kind of had taken over the scene, and they were doing their own thing, and the kids were there watching, sort of thing. So I think, what's really great is to see all of this interest that's flowering again, because it disappeared in the 80s, as we know. I don't know what went on in the culture, but it crashed.
I mean, discussion around adventure playgrounds and what went wrong could be a whole different seminar, a whole different round table.
It wasn't only adventure playgrounds either.
I know. So, I mean, I'm pretty sure that Fraser can shed some more light, as well as like other folks who were actually there during some of these changes. But ultimately, as with all different types of work, there are great examples of play workers, and there's some that aren't great. And we've met a lot of both, and it's really important to go back to that theory and to talk and to focus on that child. And that's like part of the reason why we decided to end our presentation on the child, is because often we are so sucked into agendas and funding and stuff like that. The child's voice, the child just gets lost in all of that, and we want to make sure that is central to everything we do,
especially on this side of the Atlantic, in a country
everywhere everywhere.
In a country that hasn't even ratified the Convention on the Rights of the Child. I'll just put that there. So, you know, as a cultural aspect in relation to children, I think is really worthwhile diving into. And, you know, not today, right? But those are the kinds of issues. Children's lives have changed very dramatically in the last 20 years or so. And we have to recognize that, and it's a lot of concern, right? It's different kinds of issues, but you know, how to get back to the pure reverie of play, doing your own thing in your own time, in your own space. You know, that's what it is. That's how I grew up in the UK, in the woods. Period.
Yeah,
I'm sure
absolutely.
you know, it's it.
No, and I really appreciate you like underlining the importance of locating our work in like broader social and political like context. I think that adventure playgrounds and playworkers have a really specific lens. And I loved that agents of social change line, because I think it's true. I think that when you look at social movements through a priority of children's freedom and joy, like amazing things become possible.
Right.
Merci professeur. Je vais peut-être prendre une question qui vient d'arriver, qui est arrivée tout à l'heure. Une question qu'on nous pose, à savoir quelle serait la place des architectes, et je rajouterai des paysagistes également, dans la conception d'un terrain d'aventure. Est-ce qu'ils sont vraiment nécessaires et du coup, quelle est la place de l'animateur en gros, quelle est la place du professionnel
That's a great question. Yeah. So you know, and I'm one, right? So I do believe there's a role. I think that designers are people that are trained to understand how the physical world can empower people to do what they need to do, right? So, but that's not a commonly accepted way of thinking about design. But you know, so there's different levels. Design would be the sort of site level. So you are thinking about what a site needs in terms of boundary conditions, facilities, different types of spaces, relationships between children and adults, even commonplace things like bathrooms, toilets. But also from an urban planning and parks and recreation aspect, systems aspect, there's a lot of work to do in park systems, I think, to help park planners and park staff, professionals, park professionals understand what this is about, because you don't see much of it, at least in my experience in park systems. There's some pickup and there's a few great things around the country, but it's not that commonplace. And then if you start to think about schools, which is a much tighter kind of situation with a lot of different stakeholders, you know, you need someone with a physical sense of how sites can be organized to give space for these kinds of things. And of course, you know, manufactured play equipment often gets in the way there. I could go on about this, but if the yes.
We couldn't possibly overrule anything that you say, Robin, since this isn't our field of expertise. But we do have some thoughts, and I mean, no matter what work we do as play workers, play is still not widely acceptable in society. So a lot of the work that you, a landscape architect folk, will be doing is almost screening the space from adult eyes many a time and making it look okay on the outside, so the kids can do whatever they need to do on the inside. And then obviously, like another social thing that's happening nowadays is that you can't have adventure playgrounds without the adult section, and adults need space too, so it's often the building facilities something that needs a little bit of professional eye looking over it. And finally, a quote from our dear friend Riley: one of the major things that is an issue with all adventure playgrounds is drainage.
Most children's areas have the same problem. And, you know, and then I'll shut up, right? But one thing that is absolutely obviously missing from most adventure playgrounds is the natural world, you know, and that's bugged me ever since the beginning. And it's interesting that MDROP, in fact, had that landscape berm around the whole place, which the kids explored. And the year we were there, 1987, it was full of bluebells, and it was just a wonderful place to be if you wanted to take some time out and do something else. But the lack of attention to the natural world, I think, is really problematic with adventure playgrounds, actually. And that's why we do what we do. You know, it's bringing the adventure play idea into a much more naturalistic setting. Oftentimes it's a restored natural setting, which is much more interesting to kids. They're part of that restoration. And I'll just say, it's all about tacit learning, right? And I think, Gilles, you said something right at the beginning about learning through doing. That's what adventure play is about. It's about tacit learning. It's about what you learn. Nobody told you to learn, but they provided the space and resources for you to learn on your own space, time, etc., whatever it is. But you don't learn that much from a sheet of asphalt or a hard city street, because it doesn't have the diversity. So diversity of choice is really important, and looking, to the community of children, working with each other. It's not a set of individuals. Margaret Mead, I think, said there's no such thing as a child. It's only children, because of their relationships, their culture, their community, which I think is well understood by playworkers, right?
Merci. Je vois que Fraser Brown voudrait prendre la parole. Peut-être que je vais vous la passer pour continuer à alimenter le débat. Ce sera peut-être la dernière intervention, si vous voulez bien, avant qu'on prenne une courte pause.
I just wanted to say briefly in response to what Robin was saying about what happened to the explosion of adventure playgrounds that happened in the 1960s and 1970s in the UK, and then they gradually disappeared. It's very complex, the reasons why they went, but the best summary, I think, of why that happened is contained in a chapter written by Tony Chilton in a book which was produced by myself and Bob Hughes, who has already been mentioned several times. It's called Aspects of Playwork. So if you want to know about the history of adventure playgrounds, that's a very good place to start. The other thing I wanted to say was I very much feel that the essence of adventure playgrounds is providing a space that enables the children to play as they want to. And so there is definitely a role for landscape architects, because it's perfectly possible for them to, if they use a bit of imagination, to provide a basic space that has basic materials, basic structure that enables children to play. As Robin said, the problem is that too often architects tend to look at a piece of rough land and flatten it before they actually do anything with it. I've seen several times, I've seen that happen, where I was taken to a piece of rough land which had hills and trees and bushes and even a river running through it on one occasion. And the first thing the architect did was to get rid of the trees, get rid of the hill, flatten the land, and then start putting swings and slides onto it. Well, my feeling was that if you're faced with a piece of flat land, the role of the architect ought to be to make sure there's a hill and some planting and so on, so that helps to facilitate children's play. Anyway, I'm going to talk more about the theory that underpins adventure playgrounds and playwork after the break.
Juste un mot de conclusion à propos du débat qui vient d'avoir lieu, qui était vraiment très, très intéressant, je trouve, qui est en fait une sorte de quadrature du cercle, d'une certaine façon. C'est-à-dire, on ne peut pas imaginer qu'il n'y ait pas de projet adulte pour les enfants. Il y a toujours, le problème est ça, c'est qu'il y a toujours un projet adulte pour les enfants, même lorsqu'il est minimum d'une certaine façon. Et c'est toute cette difficulté. On a bien sûr été des enfants, mais on ne l'est plus. Et donc, il y a toujours une projection adulte. Et c'est toute cette difficulté, en quelque sorte, de comment arriver à mettre les enfants au centre, à mettre la question du jeu au centre, en essayant, en tant qu'adulte, que le projet soit le plus minimal possible. Voilà. Et ça, comme on dirait, bon courage, quoi. Voilà, c'est évidemment la porte ouverte à de nombreux débats, mais on continuera certainement à en discuter. Voilà. Merci, Aurélien.